Hello everyone, and welcome to this evening's revision webinar, which really focuses on the challenge in the human environment, really, in particular resource management and energy. I'm actually going to lose the video just so that you can see the slides completely fine. But obviously I am here, you can talk to me, you can use the chat function. If I can just ask you to keep that completely relevant and appropriate to the webinar. I'm really happy to answer any questions that you may have. I actually have Kat with me who she will come up as Discover the World, and she'll be able to relay any questions that you have for me during this webinar. Okay, so as many of you know, my name's Karen. I'm currently working for Discover the World Education, having previously been a geography teacher for over 20 years. The aim of this particular webinar is to look at energy, and to give you a really focused revision session on resource management, in particular energy. We're going to look at the global distribution of energy consumption and supply, the reasons for increased energy consumptions, those factors affecting energy supply, and the impacts of energy insecurity. We're then going to consider some of the strategies used to increase energy supply, and in particular renewable sources of energy. And I also want to touch briefly on some thoughts as to how we can show you that you are really thinking and writing like geographers. It's so important to do this when you are talking to your teachers or talking to each other, when you're answering your examination questions, when you're looking even at the short questions that you have to answer, but especially the longer ones that you need to answer as well. So over the next 30 or 40 minutes, I should provide you with plenty of opportunities to think and write like geographers. And keeping these 2 points in mind when you're answering exam questions will really ensure that you use key words in your answers and extend your points to include the range of geographical concepts. So really showing that you have that X factor, that you are able to think like a geographer. So what does this actually mean? So thinking like a geographer means looking at the different angles of geography, the human or the social side of things, the physical, the environmental, the economical, the political, looking at it from a local scale and a global scale, now and in the future. And actually starting to critically think. Don't just assume that everything you read and is told and everything that you hear is right. Don't follow that tribe. We really want you as a geographer to look at the evidence, critically think about it, and then actually make your own judgments based on that evidence. We want you to make connections. You've probably heard your teachers saying to you all the time, geography is all about making connections, making links. And geographers really do make connections, and that's really what we want you to do. When you're writing like a geographer, you often need to explain the fact that one thing leads to another. We want you to look at causes, consequences. We want you to argue, to assess, to develop and extend. Use connectives, which can lead to. We want you to tell the examiner why. I often used to say to my students, pretend I'm sitting there next to you saying, but why, but why, but why? So developing your points, okay? We want you to make decisions and judgments really based on the evidence that is in front of you, as well as the knowledge and understanding that you have from each topic that you study. Okay, keywords. You often probably hear your teacher saying, know what your keywords mean. Yes, do. It's really, really important, because if you understand and know what your keywords mean, then you can use them more effectively in your answers and really show everybody that's reading what you have written that you understand what's going on. Okay. So let's just look at energy today. It's really important, and the key topics within this unit. Energy is needed for a range of activities, including lighting, cooking, heating, agriculture, fueling transport and powering industry. And as a country becomes increasingly developed, its demand for energy grows. You can see from this graph that is illustrating the rapid increase in global primary energy consumption over the last 70 years. In 1965, the bulk of the total energy, was consumed by North America, Europe, and Eurasia collectively. They accounted for more than 80% of global energy consumption. And although energy consumption has increased in these regions since the 60s, their relative share, you can see from this graph, has actually declined quite significantly. Consumption across the rest of the world has been increasing most dramatically in the Asia Pacific, where the total consumption increase is more than 12-fold over this period. This map, illustrates the global distribution of energy consumption, and there are clear geographical areas which are highlighted. North America, quite not surprisingly, has a high consumption, as does Australia and the Scandinavian countries, including Iceland. And the reason why I focus on Iceland is because Iceland is one of our case studies that we're going to be looking at tomorrow. Africa and South America are very low, with Europe and North Asia actually hovering in the middle. You can see these Scandinavian countries, Norway, Iceland, they actually have the highest amount of energy consumption than anywhere in the world. And again, we will look at that tomorrow. So let's look at this information in a little bit more detail and consider the top performers. This table shows the 10 countries with the lowest consumption per capita. As you can see, these countries are very low income countries and in the earlier stages of their development. If we compare these 10 countries with the highest levels of electricity consumption countries, all the high income countries, and these are in the latter stages of development. Iceland sits at the very top of the performance table, and I would ask you to use your critical thinking skills here and your knowledge and understanding of Iceland to assess why. Okay, we are looking at Iceland, as I said, as an energy case study tomorrow. But if I was to just say to you that they don't have oil and they don't have gas, so therefore electricity is their only fuel provider. So maybe think about that. Okay, so let's look at the reasons for the rapid increase in energy consumption. As a country develops economically, demand for energy grows. As a country becomes more developed, there is a higher demand for food, leading to more intensive farming techniques. These techniques require additional energy to provide lighting and heating. The processing, manufacturing, and transportation of food also lead to increased energy demands. As agriculture shifts from subsistence to commercial farming as a country develops, the demand for energy increases again. As improvements in living standards continue across the world, car ownership has continued to grow. And despite advances in the efficiency of engines, car manufacturing places considerable demands on energy. As demand for energy increases with urbanisation, as more people live in urban areas, the demand for energy for lighting, cooking, domestic appliances also increases. In the future, urbanisation will continue to place high demands on energy in the lesser developed areas and regions in Africa, Asia, and South America. And as people become wealthier, their demand for energy grows with increased purchases of domestic appliances, leisure and recreation activities. And global energy supplies will increase significantly in the highly populated, newly emerging economies such as India, China, and Brazil. And then we have a rapidly rising population. Population growth creates an increased demand for energy, and since the 1950s, the world population has increased dramatically, leading to the growth in demand for energy, and the overwhelming majority of this growth has been in the low-income countries and newly emerging economies where there is already an energy deficit. Population growth is most significant in Asia and Africa, where there is a considerable energy insecurity, and this provision will be a significant challenge in the future. I would encourage you to watch David Attenborough's Netflix program at this particular point. He really discusses this population boom and how this sort of like population growth is affecting our climate, but also in terms of the energy consumption and what we are having to do to meet that demand. So now let's look at the factors affecting energy availability. First of all, we have the physical factors. Geology affects the availability of fossil fuels such as oil, natural gas, and coal. The formation of fossil fuels involves the storage of organic matter in sediments or sedimentary rocks. Regions with predominantly sedimentary geology are likely to have an availability of fossil fuels. So therefore, if you don't have sedimentary geology, the chances are you will not have fossil fuels that can provide you with this particular energy source. Climate and relief can also affect the extraction of fossil fuels. Mountainous areas and regions with extreme climates present challenges for the extraction of fossil fuels and their transportation. Examples of this area are Alaska and Siberia. Considerable reserves of fossil fuels are found beneath the deep and dangerous oceans and seas, and this presents significant challenges in extracting these fossil fuels. Physical factors also present opportunities for renewable energy. For example, like this picture shows, the upland regions are particularly suited for the construction of dams and reservoirs, which support the production of hydroelectric power. Areas with reliable sunshine can be used to generate solar energy. And finally, windy locations can be used to create electricity using turbines. Geothermally active areas are particularly important as they can provide unlimited renewable energy. And tomorrow, as well as looking at Iceland, we're going to look at two other very important countries who are leading the way with different renewable energy resources. We're going to look at Iceland in terms of geothermal hydroelectric power, and we're also going to look at Costa Rica to look at their hydroelectric power and their geothermal energy. And then we're going to look at Norway and look at what they are doing in terms of solar energy and in terms of hydroelectric power. So as well as the physical factors, we also have to consider the cost of exploitation and production. Okay, as demand increases, prices rise, and therefore extraction sort of like becomes viable, where the costs of energy production are low and energy is cheap and demand can grow. We also have to look at technology. Okay, new energy resources are exploited and there's considerable growth in renewable energy. And then we have the political factors, the conflicts that occur because of energy insecurity, with high-income countries needing to maintain very good relationships with lots of different countries to ensure that actually there is energy security for their industries and their populations. There has been considerable growth in renewable energy over the last few years, and technology has really made this more economically viable and productive. Developments and the sharing of skills and ideas around the world, globalization at its best form, have enabled new energy resources to be explored and exploited, for example, fracking. We need to make sure that, the energy is in balance with supply and demand, okay? Keeping the prices as low as they possibly can be and keeping as many countries as we can being energy secure. This particular map here shows the energy security. It's largely determined by energy supply and demand. Most of the world will experience energy insecurity at some point. And when thinking like a geographer, it is really important to consider the political factors. Conflicts occur as a result of energy insecurities, for example, in the Middle East, and flows of energy can be disrupted and interrupted as a result of disputes, for example, in Libya. Oil exports are reduced due to conflicts, and to maintain energy supply, high-income countries actively maintain good relationships, and these good relationships show the global energy securities. As you can see from this map, that despite having a high reliance on imports, North America and Europe are largely energy secure. This will be because of their relationships with other countries. Whereas large areas of Central and Southern Africa, Asia and South America experience insecurity about energy. It's all about connections. So what are the impacts of energy insecurity? Energy insecurity can lead to social, environmental and economical impacts. As energy demand increases and availability decreases, exploration in sensitive areas and environments becomes more common. For example, drilling for oil in Siberia and Alaska, which threatens the fragile polar and tundra ecosystems. We have huge areas of rainforest that have been cleared in tropical areas to make way for biofuel. And the construction of dams and reservoirs has led to valleys being flooded and displacing thousands of people. The loss of farmland and the destruction of ecosystems, for example, the Three Gorges Dam in China. The controversial construction of renewable energy, such as wind and solar farms in popular upland areas, such as the Scottish Highlands and the Lake District, plus hydroelectric power in the highlands of Norway, Iceland, and Costa Rica. It is expensive to extract energy resources from remote and environmentally sensitive locations, and this leads to an increase in the price of energy, which ultimately will be met by consumers. As economic development continues across the globe, the demand for energy to increase and agricultural output will continue to grow. This is particularly in the case of areas devoid of natural energy resources and already experience energy insecurity, leading to an increase in food prices. Industrial output can be affected by energy insecurity and fluctuating prices. And as a result of this, prices can increase with growing uncertainty. Companies based in countries that experience energy insecurity therefore experience considerable challenges in competing with those countries with energy security, reducing economic output in newly emerging economies. And then finally, we have conflicts. And in countries where there is energy insecurity, there are conflicts between the different stakeholders, including industry, domestic users, and agriculture. It may be up to the government to prioritise energy users, and countries that have energy security may flood those markets in regions affected by energy insecurity. Tariffs and other controls may have to be introduced to protect the home market. Energy insecurity can lead to international political conflicts, such as disputes along the gas pipeline from Russia to the West. Energy is typically delivered as electricity. This can be generated by burning fossil fuels or mechanically using wind, steam, or water to turn turbines. In order to increase energy supply, we can either burn more fossil fuels or develop alternative renewable energy sources, which are more sustainable and less damaging to the environment. This graph shows how fuels are currently used to generate electricity. What we need to see is a shift from the majority being non-renewable to the renewables, which are the ones at the top of this particular graph. So let's now look at the different renewable energy resources, both in terms of their advantages and their disadvantages. Renewable energy resources are increasingly being used to generate electricity. As it becomes more efficient and cheaper, its role in global energy production will become more important. And here we have all the different sources that you can use when talking in your answers. So we have biomass, and you can see the advantages and the disadvantages there. Looking at different vegetations is really important. What we mustn't do, however, is sort of like destroy the wild environment. And again, the David Attenborough program on that, we must sort of like ensure that the wild environment is left in order to ensure that our planet is in balance. And then we have hydroelectric power, very, very efficient. And in the countries where you have the physical environment and location that lends themselves to hydroelectric power, it has huge advantages. But the disadvantages are that the dams and reservoirs can be ugly, unsightly, they can damage the environment, they're very expensive, and sometimes they can sort of like lead to the displacement of people and the natural environment. And then we have wave energy, and this is really good if you have coastal settlements or islands. Again, it's very expensive to construct, and the wave energy can sometimes be a little bit inconsistent. So the technology for wave energy is still developing all the time. We then have wind, and I'm sure that you have seen all the wind turbines around the country at the moment, and some of them that are sort of like very much offshore as well. And there is huge potential for wind energy in the UK. It already accounts for 10% of our electric production, and is providing quite a lot of jobs and really boosting the economy. I remember seeing one of my first examples of a wind turbine actually down in Littlehampton at the Body Shop factory down in that area, and they actually produced their own wind turbine, which produced enough electricity to actually give enough power to the Body Shop factory down there. And that was the first time I'd ever seen a wind turbine, and we're probably talking about 25 years ago. And now, we see them in quite a lot of areas around the UK. Again, some disadvantages linked to this. You need wind in order for electricity to be generated. Again, they're quite expensive, and some people don't like the aesthetic side of the turbines. And then we have solar, and solar power is very effective in areas where there is high sunshine levels. And actually Norway are really looking at solar power at the moment, because obviously in northern Norway they get 24 hours daylight during the summer months. So therefore they are looking at harnessing the light from the sun, and actually they're looking at building huge solar panels in the sea. So that they don't affect the land. Obviously, they're quite a mountainous area, so they don't affect the land. Again, energy depends on the sunlight that's available. They can be expensive, and what we don't want to do, we want to keep it in balance. We don't want to use the fields and the forest areas in order to put solar panels up, because that's sort of like, it's going against what we're trying to do here. And then we have tidal energy, really, when you've got those areas that do have quite significant tidal events. We have definitely, as a country, experimented with tidal energy, and they can be very, very effective. But again, they're very, very expensive, and obviously, unsurprisingly, they can have a negative impact on the fish and the marine ecosystems. And then we have geothermal power, and this obviously only is very effective in areas of volcanic activity. It produces vast quantities of cheap energy, and in fact, it is very, very effective in heating homes, producing hot water, and for providing energy for industry. The disadvantages are that obviously you can have some warm water going into the rivers. It can have an impact on the ecosystems of the waters around that particular area. And obviously, we do need to construct geothermal energy plants, which obviously can be unsightly, rather like the one in the picture below. So how can we move towards more sustainable energy supplies? It's really important that as a world, and it needs to be a world message, that we do move towards sustainable energy supplies. Research will tell us that fossil fuels will run out in the next 20 to 30 years. So therefore, we have to have something that is more sustainable, that is renewable. So a sustainable energy supply balances supply and demand. It's all about balance, okay? We need to develop more renewable energy supplies. We need to conserve energy, we need to improve fuel efficiency, and we need to just efficiently use those fossil fuels that we have left. Okay, by doing this, we can therefore look at reducing our carbon footprint, which is something that I know as students you are really, really keen to be doing at the moment. A sustainable energy supply has the following characteristics, and it's important that you really understand this. It doesn't damage the natural environment. So in order for it to be sustainable, it doesn't damage the environment around it. It involves and benefits all the local communities, and it can be applied to both those high-income countries and the low-income countries, as well as supporting the local economy. So let's look at some exam questions that may be sort of like something that you get in your exams or your practice papers or your questions at school. So you may be required to do some map and data interpretation. So rather like those maps and those graphs that we showed you right at the beginning, you might have to interpret that. You might have some short questions, give the causes, outline the reasons, and we'll look at those in a minute. You might have some longer questions. You might need to explain, suggest reasons, justify, develop, analyse, and you will need to use evidence to support what you are saying. We really want you to show your knowledge, and this is where tomorrow's webinar really comes into play. So, 2 examples of questions here. First of all, you've got 2 maps, one of Europe and Scandinavia and Iceland, and one of Africa. Very, very simple questions, but very easy to get wrong. Okay, so you need to make sure that you read the question, name one country which had less than 10% of energy consumption from renewable sources. Okay, so you need to pinpoint which one that had less than 10%. So you can see the UK, Ireland, Belarus, and the Ukraine. And then on this particular question on the right-hand side, what is the percentage of electricity from hydroelectric power in Mauritania? So you find Mauritania on the map, and then you have to use your color coding there and make sure that you shade one circle only. Okay, so you need to shade, obviously you can see that Mauritania, I don't know if you can see my thing here, Mauritania is here, so you can see that it is the 30 to 49. So you may get some simple questions like that. Make sure you really read the key, look at the colours, and really read the question. RTQ, I'm sure you see that quite a lot. Read the question. Okay, so some example questions. As we said right at the beginning, you must use your keywords, you must know what they mean, and we want you to think and write like geographers. So 2 causes of energy insecurity. It's worth 2 marks, okay? So you could put unequal distribution of fossil fuels, depletion of coal and oil, volatile gas, etc., etc. I won't go through all the answers, but all you have to do is write 2. You don't have to do long words or anything like that. Okay, you don't have to repeat the question and say 2 causes of energy insecurity are. You don't, okay? But you know, just make sure that you write 2 completely separate ones. This is obviously a low-level question, this one. And then you might have a slightly longer question, and this is where we really want you to show your X factor. Show that you've got something a little bit different. Really show that you can write and think like a geographer. So this particular question, explain how energy security can be improved. All right. So if you're looking at your higher level marks, we want you to show that you have a thorough understanding of the interrelationships. That basically means the connections, the links between environments and the processes in the context of energy security. And we also want you to show in detail how improvements can provide a secure source of energy. So in other words, looking at energy security. So some answers could be, all right, first of all, explain what energy security is. Show the examiner that you know what you're talking about, and then you can go into some of your answers. So a number of improvements. You could explain about renewable energy. You could talk about alternative ways of getting oil. You could look at different strategies. You could look at some of the renewable energies in the UK. All right, just really think about sort of like showing what you know, but how can we make countries more energy secure? Okay. We then have a question here, again going back to a shorter question. Outline one reason why some countries have a limited energy supply. This is where you really need to use your keywords. So you need to talk about just the fact that they might have a low income, they might have a lack of fossil fuels, and that some countries may have no control over the energy countries. And then develop that idea. Remember what we said at the beginning, say why. Imagine your teacher sitting next to you say, okay, you've said some countries have lower incomes, so how does that affect whether they have a limited energy supply or not? So you might say some countries have low incomes, so they are unable to buy energy no matter how low the price. Or they lack supplies of fossils or other fuels, which means that, so you're developing this particular answer. They've asked for one reason, okay, but it's worth 2 marks. So we want you to develop your answer a little bit further then. On that particular question, you could also use this particular figure. All right. I think the question actually said if you can use this. So actually, you could use this particular map if you wanted to, but it's up to you. You don't need to, but it's there. So actually, that could prompt you. So use all the stuff that's in front of you really to help. Okay. Long question again. Explain how different strategies can be used to make energy supplies more sustainable. What a lovely question. Okay, so you really need to demonstrate your detailed knowledge and show a really good understanding. Okay, really show that you know what you're talking about. Cover more than one strategy in good detail, and again, make the strong connections between the strategy and how it has made the energy supplies more sustainable. So you might want to talk about individual energy use, carbon footprints, conservation, redesigning homes, workplaces. You might want to talk about technology, increasing efficiency in the use of fossil fuels, demand reduction. Okay, all right, so really sort of like use examples as well. And just show how whatever strategy you have chosen, how it is going to affect energy supplies in the future. We really want you to write and think like geographers, okay? And I'm just going to quickly go through these. It's all about those connections. We want you to look at all the different aspects. We also want you to make sure that you know those key words. So when it comes to the exam questions, really make sure that you understand the question. Look for those key questions and then use your keywords and understand what they mean. Okay, so the aims of this particular webinar were to really look at how to think and write like geographers. We've covered the global distribution of energy consumption and supply. We've looked at the reasons why they've increased, and we've also looked at the factors that can affect energy supply, as well as the impacts of energy insecurity. And we've then looked at some of the strategies which are used to increase energy supply, for really focusing on those renewable sources of energy. Tomorrow, we're going to extend this topic even further, and we're really going to look at 3 fantastic case studies that really support and give evidence along the sides of looking particularly at renewable energy and the challenge of looking at the human environment and how we can manage this particular resource. We're going to look at Iceland, Norway and Costa Rica. We're going to look at the renewable energy supplies that they have, as well as how they are the 3 leading countries in terms of striving for a carbon neutral status by 2030. So if you think that's only 10 years' time, and all 3 of these countries are well on their way to being carbon neutral. If I can leave you with an Icelandic proverb, I want you to treat the earth well. It wasn't given to you by your parents, it was loaned to you by your children. And that bottom line is what sustainable development is all about. Okay, we want to use what we have, but not abuse it, and make sure that our children and our children's children still have this amazing world to share and to show to their children as well. Please do join me tomorrow. This particular webinar will now be available. So if you wanted to share it, if there's teachers listening, if you wanted to share it with your students, please do. It's a great revision sort of like tool that they can use. And as I said, please join me tomorrow for the case study information so that we can develop some of these points even further. Stay safe, everyone, and I look forward to speaking with you very soon. Take care now.